screen starts glowing, and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of The Goods, a film podcast. What month is it, Brian?
I'm losing track, Dan, because we've got the calendar all scrambled. But we're doing a theme month for our podcast. I believe chronologically we're sitting here in August. But our theme month, and the reason that I'm confused, is month.
That's right.
Where every film has to have a title incorporating the name of a month on the Gregorian calendar. You know, we could really mix it up if we threw in, like, the Hebrew calendar or the French Revolutionary calendar.
I don't know the French Revolutionary calendar. What's that?
So, they made everything, like, metric, like, informed by the Enlightenment. And so they named and they stripped the religion out of everything.
Interesting.
So every month of the year was named for something that happens in that month. And so one of the months I remember was called Fructador, or Fructador. Gavin's going to get on me if I don't say it right. I think it was Fructador. And that was the harvest month. It's when the fruit comes in. And there was one Thermador, which was the hottest month. And so I think we may be in Thermador right now, heading towards Fructador.
Yeah, so let's see. I just looked it up. It's apparently called the French Republican calendar, also commonly called the French Revolutionary calendar. And its months were in autumn, Vendémiaire, starting the 22nd of September, Brumaire, starting 22nd of October, Frimaire, and then winter was Nivosa, Pluviosa, Ventosa. Spring was germinal, floreal, and prairial. And then summer was Messidor, Thermador, and Fructador. Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay, so Thermador heading into Fructador, see?
You're right. I think we would be in Thermador right now because it's been kind of hot. But oh, wait, no. Yeah, you're right, Brian, because we're recording this on the 16th. And Fructador starts on the 18th or 19th of August. So we're almost into Fructador.
There we are. I knew it. That's one of my favorite podcast episodes. Up there with the one we were just talking about with Munster, there's a great French Revolutionary calendar podcast episode.
Is it by Dan Carlin too?
It's not. It's by a guy. Oh man, why am I blanking on his name? He did a show about the Roman Empire, and then he did another show that was all about world revolutions.
So, here, this is interesting. So they still had 12 months. I just went through them all. But they wanted 10-day weeks. So each month was divided into 3 decades, or weeks of 10 days each. Primidi, duodi, tridi, quartidi, quintidi, sextidi, septidi, octidi, nonidi, decadi. So I don't know how they would do.
I say we no needy a system that complicated.
I mean, it's really no more or less complicated than 7-day weeks. In fact, I would say it might be less complicated than a 7-day week. But the changing would be complicated if we did try to change.
Right. Well, they liked the metric system, as so much of the world does. I believe you've got a calendar theory you wanted to discuss.
That's right. So that does flow nicely into the topic that I wanted to bring up. So those people who have listened to our podcast for a while will know during our theme months, we sometimes like to indulge in topics not directly related to movies, but otherwise related to the theme months. And so we're on month topics here. So I guess we just got a little primer on the French Revolution calendar. But there's another proposal that I have heard about that I'm very intrigued by. So let me explain this to you, Brian. So as you know, there are 12 months in a year, 365 days. And that 365 days is, of course, the length of time it takes to rotate around the sun. And the interesting thing is that 364, so not 365, but 364 is divisible by 13. So if you do 13 times 28, you get 364. So here's a proposal that I've seen that is, like I said, it intrigues me. Instead of 12 months in a year with the uneven number of days, what if we had 13 months? All of them were 28 days. They're going full February. Everything's February, 28 days all the time.
And if the week stays 7 days long, then it's always going to stay in step with the calendar.
Exactly. So the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd are always Mondays. Or I think Sundays, actually. And so you can always know the day of the week from the number. You don't need to like go look it up. You don't need to do, there's like mental tricks you can learn about like subtracting this or that. My dad used to know it. You could give him a year and you could give him a date and he could like think for 45 seconds and then tell you what day of the week it was, which is actually kind of useless. It's not too often you need to like go back in time and look at what the day of the week was for a specific date.
No, but it means you can use your like 1997 Jonathan Taylor Thomas calendar again this year.
What's that?
Well, it's either 97 or 90. It's one of those years that it lines up.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Every like 20-ish years, the calendars line up again.
Right, exactly, yeah. But if you did the 13-month calendar, then every month, every year, the same numbers would be the same days of the week. So I guess one downside of this is that your birthday is always the same day of the week. So some people really luck out with that. But some people are like, oh, damn, I got a Tuesday birthday. You got a Tuesday birthday every single year.
Yeah, and any date-linked holidays, same thing. Also, on the subject of calendar companies, it would just absolutely obliterate that business. You could use the same calendar every single year.
Yeah. But the proposition would be a month between June and July called Sol, S-O-L. So, I don't know. At least then you don't need to like learn a whole bunch of new month names. Just one new month name. You don't need to learn new days of the week like the French Revolution one.
Oh, I was hoping the 13th month would be Smarch.
Oh, like Simpsons. Perfect. Lousy Smarch weather. But, okay, so I said that's 364. That just leaves a floaty day somewhere. So the idea is that you have like one day that is either like the 29th day of the very last month or just like a day that doesn't belong in any month. That's New Year's Day. So that happens like in between. So you just got this one little day that's not a day of the week, that's not a month.
Feel like people would go crazy on that day. Wild card day. Be like in Hunchback of Notre Dame.
It's like old festivals. Didn't they do festivals like that in ancient times? Like the calendar would stop or something like that. I feel like I've heard that before.
Yeah. And
then on leap years, you'd have 2 New Year's days. So 2 days that kind of fall out of the 365. Because, of course, it's actually 365 and a quarter days. And it's kind of weird how it's like almost exactly that. 365 and a quarter days. It's like, oh, it's not like 365 and 24% of a day. It's like 24.99% of a day. It's like once every X years, you need to add on 1 extra second or something like that. But in general, it goes to exactly 365 and a quarter days.
I wonder about the ancient peoples. Like, how many years do you have to observe before you understand, oh, it repeats? Like, I think you would figure out the seasons pretty quick, and that they go in the same order. But, like, how many times do you have to go through a year with no calendars or anything to understand the precise length of a year?
I feel like ancient people were pretty in tune with that stuff. So, like, the seasons they're not, like, arbitrary. They flow with each other, of course. And I feel like, I don't know, like, they looked at the stars every single night really closely. I feel like they would have a good sense. Maybe they couldn't tell you it's 365 days, but, you know, they would know, hey, it's about 13 moon cycles that is 1 year, you know?
Yeah. I'm not underselling ancient peoples. I actually have a lot of respect for ancient peoples. I'm saying I personally don't think I would ever figure it out.
Maybe, yeah.
I'd be believing in dragons and stuff.
You'd be one of those people, yeah. It's in metric in its own way because it's kind of uniform. It gets rid of the like imperial. When I think of imperial measurement systems, I think of like uneven units. It's like, 12 inches and then 5,000 feet to a mile. It's like, okay, that's like kind of arbitrary.
5,280, Dan.
Exactly. Yeah. See how'd they come up with that number? I'm sure there's a reason they came up with that number, but I kind of like how the 13-month year, other than the one day that kind of sticks out there, it's very even and very orderly. Kind of like a metric system.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, the calendar is crying out for some renewal, some revision, because it's got the months in there, October, November, December, and because of the Roman emperors messing around, they're out of sync. Month 8 is not month 8. Month 9 is not month 9.
Although I learned recently, I think I don't know if I've ever put this fact on the podcast, but misinformation I have inadvertently spread in the past is that the reason we have 12 months instead of 10 is because 2 Roman emperors inserted in their own months. But they didn't actually insert in months. Those months were separately inserted in, but they renamed months. So let's see. July used to be called Quintilis. Can you imagine if we had a month called Quintilis, Brian? That was before it became named after Julius Caesar, who's like, no, we're not calling it Quintilis anymore. We're calling it July after me.
Big Quintilis blowout.
Anyways, and there's an August was something else too, probably like Sextilius or something. I don't know.
That's bizarre. So then when did they get thrown out of whack?
Because there's 10 and the last one is the 12th month. I don't really know. That's a good question. I do know it's called January because of Janus, the god with 2 heads.
Right, he looks forward and he looks back.
That's exactly, yeah. All right. Anyways, we're kind of going on and on here.
We're dodging the issue. We did watch a movie.
We did. And that movie is called September. No other words, just September. Just like last week, we watched May, December. Undiluted month in the title.
We've kept it so pure. I'm afraid to throw that off as we go forward, but we'll see. We'll see what I have lined up next.
And like I said, a 1987 film called September is what I asked Brian to watch for this week. So this, if I'm not mistaken, is the first film by Woody Allen that we have discussed on the pod. So I got a lot of thoughts and feelings towards Woody Allen. Mixed, let's say. How much Woody Allen have you seen, Brian?
I may have at one point said on the podcast I hadn't seen any Woody Allen, but that's not true. I did see Midnight in Paris.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty late Woody Allen. So I'm not sure that any director's reputation has diminished more in the last 15 years than Woody Allen. Like, if you had talked about Woody Allen around the turn of the millennium, maybe like a few years after that, I think, it would not be controversial to put him among like the top 20 directors of all time. And I feel like both with the controversies around his personal life, which I'll talk about in a second.
Talk about May, December.
Yeah, exactly. And just a kind of diminishment in respect of the kind of movies that he writes and directs in general. I feel like his reputation has really sunk down quite a bit. So he has a ridiculously long and prolific career. Do you know off the top of your head how many movies Woody Allen has made, Brian?
I don't, but you are quite familiar with the oeuvre, right? Yeah, I think, have you seen all of them?
Not all of them. I've seen a lot of them. And the number of films that he has made, he has released 52 feature-length films, which has to put him among the most prolific mainstream directors, for sure.
Yeah, that's one for every week of the year.
That's a good point. That would be a heck of a year, man. Watching one Woody Allen every year. Watching one Woody Allen every week. And he more or less churned out at least one every single year. Basically from 1969 onwards, it was one almost every year. So he had one in 69, 71, 72, 73, 75. In 1987, he released 2 films. In 1989, he released 2 films, one of which was a anthology that he contributed to. So that means, and then he had another film in '88. So that was 5 films in 3 years, Brian. And this isn't just like a guy just churning them out. Like, these were getting Oscar nominations. I mean, it's crazy.
Right. And he's not on the timetable like D.W. Griffith, where he's got to make, 2 films a week or whatever.
This is just what he was doing. And he famously appears in a whole bunch of his movies, less so later in his career. Like, basically, if you look post 2003, he's only in a handful of his own films. But he very often starred in his own movies. Although September, the one we're watching today, is not one that he starred in. He does not appear in the cast of this one. But if you look at most of his more famous films, Annie Hall, Manhattan, he appears in a whole bunch of them. He's not in Midnight in Paris, although oftentimes, even when he doesn't appear, he has a character who's basically him, like that he would play, because he always writes a character who's kind of like him in his movies, a stand-in, and whether he plays him or not depends on the film. But I think there's a writer character in September who he kind of like plays the role of the Woody Allen character in most of his movies.
Yeah, I could absolutely tell that this movie was written and directed by the same person.
Really?
It was an extremely writerly movie.
Yeah. So I would not have picked September as our entry point into Woody Allen, but for the month coincidence, because it's kind of both unrepresentative and unremarkable. It's the second pure drama he ever did. He's very famously a comedy director that gradually he injected more drama into his movies, so that I don't know, his median film, his average film is like a dramedy with a little more comedy than drama, I'd say. This one is basically a pure drama. It's not funny at all, and that's not representative of the kinds of movies.
I see. And this one also is quite stage-like.
Yeah, that's also very unrepresentative. So a couple things that kind of typically represent a Woody Allen movie. Very often they have main characters who are between their 30s and their 50s and are facing some sort of midlife crisis and have some sort of unrequited love or unfulfilling romantic life. And I mean, Woody Allen is had a famously neurotic love life throughout his documented life. And he also, his characters tend to be very well educated and very articulate. And I think you see that here. Pretty much all the characters are pretty articulate and brainy type characters, or at least pseudo brainy. I don't know. And I have seen, I just started watching his movies back in 2020 or 2021. I started with the very beginning of his career, his first movie, Take the Money and Run, which is almost a sketch comedy. And it's really funny. I honestly, if I were just choosing a movie for us to just talk about, I would pick maybe Take the Money and Run, because it's just got a lot of funny gags in it. That are well constructed. He wrote a lot of plays before he made movies, and then he was a screenwriter. And then he did not like other people directing his movies. He would get mad at the decisions they made and the casting they did. And so at some point in the late 60s, he's like, all right, I'm only going to write scripts for movies that I direct from here on out. And since then, he's written and directed. All of the movies he's directed, he's written. And every script that he's written, with just one or two exceptions, since the late 60s, he's directed himself. So, I mean, like I said, I don't know if any director's reputation has diminished quite so much as Woody Allen recently, and a lot of that rides on the back of the controversies around his personal life. So Woody Allen has been fairly credibly accused of sexually assaulting his stepdaughter, I believe it is, when she was something like 4 or 5 years old, pretty young.
And did they subsequently marry?
So his whole relationship with Mia Farrow who by the way stars in September and in a lot of his movies. They just had this extended, neurotic, bitter relationship. They were married for a long time, and they were also together when they weren't married, and they adopted some kids, but then separately adopted Mia Farrow adopted kids. So they were married at one point. I don't know if they were married when the accusation took place. And one thing that people, I don't know, like, it's kind of hard to talk about these types of incidents with any sort of nuance because, like, if you couch it at all, or if you, like, try to frame it with too much perspective, it comes across as, like, you're diminishing or defending the act itself. And so, like, I'm not really here to, like, call Woody Allen a good guy or, like, say that he did nothing wrong or anything like that. I think the specific incident that gets most often cited gets ballooned out of proportion relative to other things about Woody Allen that are kind of messed up. Another thing that gets kind of misrepresented is you'll hear that he married his stepdaughter.
So wait, are those different stepchildren you're talking about?
Yes. He ended up marrying a woman much younger than him named Soon-Yi Previn. And sometimes you'll hear this framed as he married his own stepdaughter, which is not quite right because Mia Farrow adopted her after they were separated. They may or may not have been legally married. So he was never a guardian to her, which again doesn't really diminish like the creepiness too much. I don't think it's accurate to say that he actually married his own stepdaughter, but it is kind of splitting hairs to some extent because he married the adopted daughter of his ex-wife, and she's like a lot younger than him.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you listen to the song I'm My Own Grandpa, nothing that actually happens in there is illegal, but it would be very strange.
And I think also he married her when she was, I'm going to say 19 or something like that. No, she was 21. And reportedly, there's mixed evidence on whether they courted when she was underage. My guess is that he did. I mean, even in like semi-autobiographical films, he's doing that. So, okay, consider the movie Manhattan. So Manhattan is one of Woody Allen's most famous movies. Manhattan is this like really tenderly written, funny, romantic comedy that he made just a couple years after he won the Best Picture Oscar for Annie Hall, which, by the way, was the one that beat out Star Wars semi-famously. Annie Hall, he won Best Picture, and he's won Best Director before. But a couple years later, he made Manhattan.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine Star Wars winning Best Picture? That would be so different from the kinds of movies that typically win Best Picture.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it was nominated, which is wild.
It's like a pretty singular achievement. I mean, like the score is so good, and you look at other things from around that time, and Star Wars really stands out.
Yeah. I mean, I think Star Wars is a masterpiece, and I would have given it Best Picture. But so Manhattan, 1979, it might actually be the single most beautifully shot comedy in movie history. Like, I honestly, I don't think I've ever seen one that's more beautiful. Gordon Willis was the cinematographer. He paired with Woody Allen for a bunch of films, and all of them are just like lovely to look at. Like, you think of Woody Allen and you think of talkie movies, you think of his own self-insert characters, but he really became like a director of repute and made some just terrifically constructed and well-written films. So the problem with Manhattan is it opens with him in a relationship with a 17-year-old, and he's 42. And then it ends with him getting back together with the 17-year-old and kind of like idolizing the innocence of being in a relationship with a young person. It's like unwatchable today. It ruins this otherwise masterpiece of a movie that it has like this element of Woody Allen's messed up personal life in it. So I don't know. I don't blame people for not wanting to watch any Woody Allen movies because unlike some other problematic creators, he really injects himself and his neuroses and his hang-ups and the problematic stuff about him into the movies he makes. And that is, to me, what makes it kind of tough to sit through sometimes. It's like, geez, dude, like, stop, like, filter yourself a little bit. Like, view yourself from the outside a little bit more than you're doing.
Right, a little bit of perspective.
Yeah. And another thing about Woody Allen's career is that I would contend, and I would say it might not even be close, that he has worked with the most impressive set of actors of any director ever. I mean, if you just start looking at all of the people that he's worked with who've starred in his movies through the years, it's just totally mind-blowing. It's like hundreds and hundreds of great actors worked with him through the years. I mean, it's kind of like how, Wes Anderson these days. Anyone will work with Wes Anderson. It's awesome to work with Wes Anderson. Oh, can you believe that Tom Hanks is in a Wes Anderson movie? Yes, I can, because everyone works with Wes Anderson. That's how it was with Woody Allen for like 40 years. So I'm not saying he worked with every single great actor, but if you start looking at them, like the movies, you're like, holy shit, he made a movie where so-and-so starred? Like, yeah, he did, because he worked with some of the most prestigious actors in Hollywood and international for decades and decades. He has a Sean Penn movie. He's got a Robin Williams movie. He's got a Leonardo DiCaprio movie, a Steve Carell movie, an Alec Baldwin movie, Owen Wilson movie. He, of course, worked with Diane Keaton. He's worked with Emma Stone. I mean, just the list it's literally hundreds. That was just me glancing at a couple.
Wow. I do like when directors don't get too rooted in using the same people over and over. Like when they're able to work with different folks, I think that's good.
And so I think we've swung maybe too far away from appreciating Woody Allen. I mean, I think also the style of his writing, like it's like kind of middlebrow comedy. I don't really like that term. I try not to use that term anymore, but I guess I just did. It's like smartish comedy, and occasionally it's legitimately smart. Like he had a very good film early in his career called Love and Death, which is like just this elaborate satire on Russian literature. And that's like the kind of dorky stuff that he would do. But other times it's just kind of smart-ish. And I feel like there's a little bit of just smart-ishness in September, for example. Like nowadays, when you think of smart films, you think of like really like esoteric, experimental, arty films. And he didn't really make arty films. He just made it like he wrote it as if he were a smart person. I don't know. It's kind of a fine line. I'm not sure. So September, again, it was a pure drama that he made. And that's the one that we're talking about. He really liked international film. And that's one thing that I always give him credit for is he like advocated for international film. Not as much as like Martin Scorsese did or whatever, but he always talked about how much he loved it and tried to like bring in influences from other films. So this movie opens with people talking about going to see a Kurosawa film. You remember that, Brian?
And it comes up a couple times. This movie, well, I'm going to kind of like sprinkle my thoughts over the course of the episode, but they're like trapped in this house. So they've all kind of assembled here organically, but then it seems like some of the things that happen to keep them there are less than organic. But yeah, they're like, oh, well, we could go see the Kurosawa film, and they never go anywhere. They're like, or we could do this. Well, it got to be like the Twilight Zone episode where they wake up in the dollhouse. It's like, there is no escape. There's no outside to this house.
Right. Yeah, I think the setting is kind of interesting. It makes it feel very much like a play. And I think that's intentional. Like, I think he really liked the writer Chekhov. And I think this is a lot like a Chekhov play. In particular, I don't know any Chekhov plays, but I've seen, there was one he wrote called Uncle Vanya. I've seen that cited as a direct inspiration for this.
I saw that as well. The one Chekhov play I've read is The Cherry Orchard.
I was just looking at a list of actors. He had a Hugh Jackman movie too, Brian. There's a Hugh Jackman, Woody Allen.
Has he done any musicals?
I don't think he's done traditional musicals, no. But his films often have compelling music in them. He liked classical music a lot. I mean, he's still alive and still does, although he's old now. He's still churning out movies. Now it's like one every 3 years, particularly because people aren't quite so excited to work with him now that he's canceled. But he's like 88 years old now. And he just had one come out last year.
Everybody's old. I saw a commercial the other day with like Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's looking old.
Yeah. It's depressing for me to look at photos from the red carpet premieres, because it'll be like, here's Ryan Seacrest, and he's 54 years old. And I'm like, oh my God. And then like everybody's just, yeah, you're right. Everybody's old.
Yeah, Brad Pitt is 60.
It's crazy, man. But anyways, so on the topic of Woody Allen's music, Back to Manhattan, its opening might be like in, I don't know, my top 10 or top 15 movie openings ever. It's him narrating how much he loves New York, Manhattan, and it's scored to Rhapsody in Blue. And he keeps like trying to figure out the right way to open his story about how much he loves Manhattan. And he keeps like kind of starting it and then stopping it and then starting over again. And it's got Gershwin in the background and that lovely Gordon Willis photography. And it just kind of coalesces together into this like really touching love letter to a city. And he did know how to use all the components of filmmaking pretty well. But I don't think he ever did a musical. That would have been interesting. The weirdest movie he ever made might be Zelig. Do you know what Zelig is, Brian?
No, I don't.
It's a mockumentary that basically is the Forrest Gump gimmick, but the whole movie is just him inserting himself into historical scenes. And it's like mockumentary, so you have talking heads too, and it's kind of structured as like a romantic comedy. That one is extremely interesting and weird, and I would like to talk about that one.
I would watch that.
He also, his favorite director was Bergman. He also really loved Fellini. So he has this movie called Stardust Memories, which is basically just a remake of 8.5. It's with all the meta stuff. We talked about 8.5 a while ago. His dramas were very heavily inspired by Bergman, this one included. So he would do like a lot of people looking back on their own lives and like sort of ambivalently, to some extent, like romanticizing it, and to some extent kind of like feeling very unfulfilled by the life that they've led. And I think you see that a little bit with the Elaine Stritch character in this movie. But anyways, I guess I'm kind of rambling, hopping around Woody Allen related topics here. I've seen 19 Woody Allen movies. I basically just watched them in chronological order until I decided that I had seen too many Woody Allen movies in a short span of time. And then I was like, I'm going to take a break and maybe come back to this someday. But I got through like his most critically acclaimed years and then some of his kind of mid-career stuff. And then I've seen one or two of his later films too. But yeah, I would like to see more of his movies some days, just because it's always fascinating to see. He brought out good performances in actors. So the movie he made after September was called Another Woman, and that starred Gina Rowlands, who just died and was a very well-regarded actress. I mean, you often see her performance in A Woman Under the Influence among the greatest, most noteworthy performances in any movie. And she kind of had a long career, and she's absolutely terrific in that Woody Allen film, Another Woman. But she just died, and so there's been a lot of looking back on her career. So I tend to think Allen's dramas are not quite as good as his comedies and his dramedies. I looked up what Pauline Kael had to say about Woody Allen and his dramas, and
can you explain to me who Pauline Kael is?
Oh yeah, she's a very famous movie critic who was writing in the 60s and 70s and 80s. She and Roger Ebert were kind of two of the big people to praise New Hollywood early on. Gotcha.
Well, I have heard of Ebert, but I had not heard of the other person you were just talking about until you brought it up this week.
Pauline Kael.
Not Pauline Kael, the other one.
Gina Rowlands?
Gina Rowlands. Never heard of Gina Rowlands, so.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so she, a great drama actress. She was also in The Notebook, if you've ever seen The Notebook. So here's what Pauline Kael had to say about Woody Allen. And she wrote this in the context of a review of Another Woman, but again, it had just been 2 dramas in a row by Allen. So she was kind of just reflecting on him writing dramas in general. If there's a tragic waste in Allen's career, it's that he doesn't place a high enough value on his own talent. He labors to be an artist like Bergman and turns into a sood. By the way, that's a good, I like that, sood. That's like a fraud. It's like a 60s hippie term for a fraud, I think. And turns into a sood. If he could just stop dichotomizing himself between funny Allen and serious Allen, even Marion would recognize that life includes cracking a joke now and then.
Yeah, stop dichotomizing yourself, you sood.
How can you embrace life and leave out all the good, vulgar trashiness? And I think there's something to what she's saying in that Woody Allen wanted to be respected as an artist. And in some ways that made him improve his craft. Like he tried to figure out how to make real movies, artistic movies, instead of just dumb comedies. But it also sometimes held him back and limited what he was best at, which was being like a little goofball. Because that doesn't really come out in September. If you watch any more Woody Allen movies, Brian, I would encourage you to watch a comedy of his, because I think it reflects a little bit better on what his talents are as a writer.
Okay, good to know.
All right, so let's actually talk about the film, Brian. We kind of have a little bit. This is as I've said numerous times, drama. And as you pointed out, a chamber drama, you might call it.
That's what I would call it. It feels like you're looking in at a dollhouse or something.
And the setting is a house in Vermont. And the woman who is living there is Lane, played by Mia Farrow. And over the course of 2 acts, it's very much a 2-act play. The first act, the first half of the movie takes place all in one night. The second half of the movie, I think we're to read, is all...
It's a little later.
Yeah.
It's like the aftermath of the stuff that happens, but it's not immediately following it.
And I think there's another time break in between scenes in there, whereas the first act is just like almost real time. And it kind of deals with her and her depression and various romantic entanglements that she has, and as well as this kind of like complicated relationship she has with her mom, who technically owns the house. So there's really a cast of 6 here throughout the duration. I think like 1 or 2 other actors appear. They're people potentially buying the house. But in general, it like kind of rotates around these 6 people. So we have Lane, that's Mia Farrow. The mom is named Diane, and she's played by Elaine Stritch, who I did not know prior to seeing this, but she is really good in it. She's the best actress here.
She was the best part of the movie, and what I recognized her from is she had an arc on the sitcom 30 Rock where she played Alec Baldwin's domineering mother.
Oh, interesting.
So for a while I was like, where have I seen her? And that was where.
So I guess that's her type, yeah. But she was a prolific and successful Broadway actress. So that's kind of her main claim to fame, is her stage career. But she's in this, and she gives a really terrific performance. The closest thing to something funny in this, I would say. We also have Peter, who is probably the closest. It's probably what you would call the Woody Allen self-insert character here, except he's not played by Allen. So he's a writer. And he's played by Sam Waterston. We also have Diane Wieston here, who appeared in a few Allen movies, and is a character named Stephanie. Now, I did say that Allen has worked with a whole bunch of different actors and actresses, but he did have some people who appeared in multiple movies. Like Farrow appeared in multiple movies, Diane Keaton appeared in multiple movies, Diane Wiest appeared in multiple movies. She got an Academy Award nomination in one of his movies, I think.
Wow. And we saw Diane Wiest. We saw Diane Wiest in Parenthood.
Oh, yeah. She was in that too, yeah. We also have Howard, who is played by an actor named Denholm Elliott.
You know where I recognize Denholm Elliott from, right?
No. Oh, Breaking Bad?
No, not Breaking Bad. I love Breaking Bad, obviously, but I also love Indiana Jones.
Oh.
And Denholm Elliott is Marcus Brody. He gives Indiana Jones his mission.
Oh my gosh, I didn't recognize him, but you're right. I can see it now that I'm thinking about the face.
In Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade.
Yeah.
And presumably he's there behind the scenes during Temple of Doom, but we don't see him in the movie.
Well, let's see. So this is 87. So when did the Indiana Joneses come out?
81 was Raiders, and I think 89 was Last Crusade.
So this is what he was doing between those 2 missions.
He does mention that he works at a school, so I'm got the headcanon that it's the same character.
Okay. And then the last character out of the 6 is named Lloyd, played by Jack Warden. And this is Diane's husband, so Elaine Stritch, Lane's mother. her husband. And he
makes a speech about being a physicist.
I thought that was that not Howard? I thought Howard was the physicist. Or is he the physicist?
Let's see. Let's go to the tape.
Oh, yeah, you're right. He does have a conversation. I'm getting them mixed up.
Okay, no, it was Jack Warden was the physicist, and the other character, Marcus Brody, he kind of disappears for a while. It's like he's hanging around, and then he gets shut down, and then he is gone for a bit, and then he's back.
He's just a teacher.
But we saw Jack Warden back when we covered used cars. He ran one of the used car lots. Actually, I think he ran both of them, because he had wasn't he playing a twin or something? Or I don't remember exactly, but he was in charge of one of those businesses in the feud.
Yeah, that's right. I remember him appearing in that now that you say that. I don't remember what he did in that one, though. Which one he was. Was he the villain in that? I can't remember.
I think he was. But what I'm trying to remember, because it was brothers running the two businesses on either side of the road, and I think one of them might have died, and I'm trying to remember if he played both of them.
I'm not sure.
Yes, Jack Warden played both the brothers in Used Cars.
Oh, wow.
Roy Fuchs and Luke Fuchs.
Okay, so Lloyd is a physicist. And Howard, you're right, is a French teacher. So he's just a teacher. So what's the name of his character in Indiana Jones again?
Marcus Brody.
Yeah, so Marcus Brody is also a French teacher here, I guess. So the thrust of the movie is basically there's a love quadrilateral going on. So Lane is in love with the writer. That's Peter, Sam Waterston. Peter is in love with Stephanie. So that's Diane Weist's character, and she's Lane's best friend. I can't even remember why she's there.
I could never figure out why she was there either.
She just kind of shows up and hangs around. I think she might just be supporting Lane. So one thing we'd learn about Lane is that she's recovering from a suicide attempt and is still kind of depressed.
Right, and kind of trying to figure out what she's going to do next.
Right. And Richard Brody is in love with Lane, so in love with Mia Farrow. So I guess if you were to draw a diagram here, you have Denholm Elliott, Howard, aka Richard Brody, the French teacher.
Wait, what's his actual last name? Because Brody is Indiana Jones.
Denholm Elliott.
Right, no, that's the person. What's the characters?
I think we just get Howard.
Howard, okay.
Howard is in love with Lane, the main character played by Mia Farrow, who's the depressed one, who is in love with Peter, who's the writer. And Peter is in love with Stephanie, who is Diane Weist, who is Lane's best friend. So the tension between those four is the main thrust of the story. And then there's also Lane's mom and her husband hanging around in the background. And that's Elaine Stritch and Jack Warden. And so the main thing with the mother is just Lane feuding with her, and there's this kind of half interesting backstory. So Diane used to be a famous actress when she was young, and she dated a gangster, and Lane killed the gangster husband and basically took the blame for it. And that's kind of haunted her life ever since. But in the twist of this movie, we learn that actually it was Diane who killed the gangster, and Lane just kind of took the fall. So she's been sitting on this double guilt, both that she was accused of killing someone and that she's covering for her mom's dark secret.
Yeah, made to be the patsy because she was a minor, and so the penalty wouldn't be as severe.
And Peter, the writer, is thinking of writing a biography of Diane, her life story, because it kind of has all these twists and turns.
Right, and I think a source of the big conflict is that Lane, the Mia Farrow character, she's very soft-spoken. She's very shy and sheltered and kind of a shrinking violet. And she's grappling with the fact that her mother has this big outsized personality. And how does she emerge from that shadow? Yeah,
and it's especially complicated because because she's in love with Peter, and Peter is like fascinated with Diane's life, when Lane is just like, no, be fascinated with me, because we learn at one point that they had a very brief affair earlier in the summer.
Okay, everything in this movie is less interesting than the things at the periphery of this movie. We're just repeatedly told about things that happened in the past that we never see. It's like, oh, but we hooked up. And it's like, did you? I'm not getting that feeling. I didn't see it. You're just telling me things.
Right. And I think that's partially by design of it being like a play-esque movie. So you don't really see the stuff. It just ends up kind of feeding in from the outside and gradually like building more of a picture of the relationship. It's like a very stagey style. And I can see why you would think it is unsatisfying.
What I liked was the like audio design, and I do like this choice of location. They really convince you that this is like a rural vacation house. You can hear like the insects at night, and at one point the power goes out, and so they're all interacting by candlelight. And like the lighting in the film is very nice, the cinematography, there's a lot of like subtle camera movement, so even though it's very talky, like it keeps you engaged by the movement of the camera.
Yeah, it's like kind of remarkable how long the takes are. Like it really does make it feel kind of like a filmed play in some ways, but not that exactly, because you're right. Alan was a pretty good director at this point in his career, and I would say for most of his career he's been an excellent director, at least that I've seen. And he really does make you feel like, yes, it's an actual space. I think he does a great job of that here. One thing that is like, I was reading about this one time, and maybe you could speak to this more, Brian, but apparently it's like a challenge to compellingly and consistently film a conversation in which both people are in the frame and which takes place over a single take. And there's because there's a bunch of things that feed into that. So one is you need, like very often in a movie, if you see a conversation, it cuts back and forth between the two actors because they're like basically taking the best version of each line. But Woody Allen really did not like doing this consistently across his filmography. He likes to see both actors on screen at the same time in a single take. And you definitely get that in this. Like all of the conversations are a single take, really. And you also need to like kind of have physical blocking space for both of the actors to act. So like it's maybe harder to actually like construct a shot like this than you might think is the simplest thing. It's like two people in a medium shot talking. But I don't know, I've read that like Woody Allen kind of made it look easier than it actually is in general. And so where the conflict arises here is with Lane in love with Peter and Peter in love with Stephanie. Stephanie's married, by the way. That's another recurring theme throughout Woody Allen's career is affairs. And I think that probably speaks to how faithful he was in his relationships throughout the years, probably, considering how much of himself he put into these movies. But Stephanie is married and has kids, which comes up a couple of times. But Peter's kind of pursuing her.
And to me, the kids just seemed like an abstraction, like a second thought or third thought.
And I think it's there to try and build the idea that Stephanie kind of has this outside life. But I agree, it doesn't really convey that clearly. And all of this kind of boils really slowly. Like the one night, that's the first half of the movie, there's a storm. And the storm puts the power out. So we just kind of see various permutations of the characters interacting with each other. I think my favorite scene from the first half of the movie is Diane, the Elaine Stritch character, the mom, getting increasingly drunk. And then she like has a Ouija board that she does her own sort of Ouija board monologue about her ex-lovers and how they kind of haunt her. And it's both kind of fun to watch and just does a better job than some of the other parts of this movie in terms of like kind of fleshing out that these characters have these dark and complicated lives outside of what we see in this 80 minutes, you know?
That was the highlight of the film for me. It had the nice lighting, and obviously, you know me, anytime a Ouija board is involved, that's going to give the movie a little bit of bonus points.
I didn't know that. Are you a Ouija board fiend?
Not really, but it's like a little influx of genre here. It's like a little bit of spookiness.
And so the second half of the movie, we see kind of some of these tensions that are introduced throughout the first film sort of blow up. So Lane has a argument with her mother over these tensions that have been rising about selling the house, because Lane is kind of trying to move on, but Diane is kind of waffling between moving on and clinging to the past. And it's kind of a metaphor for their own sort of relationship with nostalgia and the past and their complicated history. And then the kind of crux of the drama comes when Peter and Stephanie, so the writer character, and Diane Wiest kiss. And just then, Lane kind of walks in and sees them. And remember, she's been like kind of on the edge of depression this whole time. And so that kind of sends her into a spiral. So the last sort of 20 minutes of the movie is them sort of recovering from this spiral that Lane is going into. I mean, it's still just like a kind of talky movie, so it doesn't get too extreme or anything like that. But there's a little bit of like shouting and arguing and stuff going on here. And it just kind of ends with them all parting ways, nobody romantically linked.
And they say, soon it will be September.
That's the thing.
Meaning this whole time it wasn't even September. False advertising. Because, like, a lot of the conversations they say, like, it's the end of the summer, or, like, looking back on the summer. So I thought we were in September. I guess we were in late August.
Right. It's like the very edge of the fall.
So it's a timely pick, and it's one that actually involves, well, kind of, because it's not September yet, kind of involves the month in the title, which is not going to be 100% the case in the movies that we talk about. It certainly wasn't last time.
Yeah, it at least involves September. You're right. Because May-December had nothing to do with May and nothing to do with December. It's not a sad ending. It's not a happy ending. It's just kind of an ambivalent ending. And I think this is what Woody Allen thought sophisticated was. Kind of like European style ambivalence. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of European art films, French New Wave and Bergman and stuff, kind of had this sort of emotional ambivalence to it. And that's how September ends. It's a pretty short movie. It's 82 minutes. I think more movies should be 82 minutes long. That is one reason I like watching Woody Allen movies, is because you're going to be in and out within 95 minutes. Almost every single one of his films. A couple of them are a little longer, but not too much longer. And I agree with you in the strengths. I think you talked about the sound design. So one thing that Woody Allen very often does is he has jazz scores. So jazz is the background music of his films. And here we do get some of that, but it's only when somebody's playing it on a record player or when somebody's playing the piano. So it's not like, it's all diegetic score, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of like toying with your perception of the film and like enhancing the sense that they're all in this one crowded space, you know?
Right. So I said I was going to sprinkle out my thoughts, and I feel like I didn't do as well of a job as I should have done, because it's going to kind of be condensed now in the negative. But there are a few things about this movie that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up, and now that we've burned through the plot, I think now is the time. But Peter, the writer character, to me, very off-putting, because he's so aggressive in pursuing this Diane Wiest character. And so just a few things about this being like so central to the movie, this relationship between the two of them, is he won't take no for an answer. And he repeats the same advance like 6 times. Like this same scene just happens over and over of him saying, "I must have you. I've yearned for you all this time." And the person he's yearning for is Diane Wiest. And she's wearing like a man's shirt very, very little makeup. She's got this, like, shorn head almost, really, really short hair. And I don't know. And then she says, no, she's not into it. Okay, that should be the end. He should pump the brakes. But no, 3 minutes later, he's back again, like nuzzling her neck. And it's weird. It's like, you gotta stop. This is the wrong lesson to be sharing with your audience. That, oh, just keep doing the same thing over and over, and then she'll come to your, like, bungalow basement apartment, wherever it is that he is living, mooching off this other girl who has feelings for him. And she, Diane Weiss says, no, 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 okay. And then she follows him off to this apartment that he's got, which, okay, so this is an important event, but we don't see it. They leave the house proper, and so because of the strictures of the conceit of the film, we don't go with them. It's like they head out, and it fades out, and then boom, there's a time jump. So, like, if you're going to make this the thing, and maybe you can argue that this is not the important thing, but it's like, well, he was really, really pushing for it. Really, really pushing for them to get together. Now they're together, and we're going to cut away.
Yeah, I think I agree with certainly portions of that. I think you're right that there's not quite the right balance in terms of the way that Peter is written. Like, we're kind of led to believe that there's this sort of mutual attraction between him and Stephanie, but we don't really get enough of that prior to him just coming on to her over and over again. There's like one conversation towards the beginning of the film where she's like, yeah, I listened to that record and I liked it a lot. And they kind of like meaningfully look at each other. And I think that's like supposed to be our cue that, okay, they are attracted to each other, but she doesn't want to act on it. But it's like, it's not very explicit and not very well defined.
I feel like saying you like a record that somebody bought you is just something you say when somebody gives you a record.
I don't know. You didn't pick up from that scene that it was like a metaphor for their mutual attraction.
What I got was because Peter brings it up like 5 times. He says, so, did you listen to the record? Did you like the record? What do you think of the record? And it's like, okay, well, he clearly wants this to mean something. But she was like, yeah, I listened to it. It was good. She struck me as kind of icy this whole movie. And then suddenly, like 2/3 of the way through, she's talking to Lane, Mia Farrow, and she says, well, I have been flirting with him this whole time. It's like, you have been? I didn't see that.
Well, I think some of that is like, we see her like try to, and he just kind of like walks away and is like, no, not right now. But we are told that they like spent a lot of the summer leading up to it together.
Right. No, I mean that Diane... sorry, it's confusing because there's a character named Diane and there's an actress named Diane. And they're not the same character. But Diane Weiss, Stephanie, says that in the past, like recent past, she has been flirting with Peter. She says that about herself. And I never got that feeling.
So you felt like there was missing establishment in the relationship there.
Right, between Stephanie and Peter.
But even just more broadly, like the characters in general. You felt like there was implication of stuff. It acted as if something was there that wasn't quite there.
Correct. That was my feeling.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I was a little lower on this than the first time I watched it. I think part of it is like, it's a double-edged sword to spend a lot of time with one writer and one director. And I think when I was watching like every Woody Allen movie in consecutive order, I like kind of understood his rhythms and the way that like he wrote characters and like what they were thinking about. And it made a little more sense to me when I watched it the first time. And here I was kind of with you where like the characters are just kind of opaque. And the way that they act, because of, as you said, the structure where we're only seeing them in one place, we needed a little more definition from that. It's just kind of stuffy and not very, we don't get like a whole colorful look at the characters. They're just always kind of, you're right. So Diane Weiss is icy, Lane is moody, Peter is longing. Diane is the one, the Elaine Stritch character. She's the one character who's like kind of got some color, but she's just kind of got her heads in the clouds. I think you're right that she ends up being the most fun part of this to watch, but yeah.
And I liked Jack Warden, but I don't know that I buy him as a physicist. and also the physicist-y things that he says seemed like lines in a script that he memorized.
Interesting.
Like, okay, well, you already knew you were going to say that. You were waiting for your opportunity to say it, and then when the time came, you said it. I don't really buy that this is anything other than something a writer wrote. And also the writer character is the character that everybody has the hots for. And it, like, the mom is very invested in the writer, and both of the younger women are invested in the writer. So this is like, I knew that there was a writer at the heart of this thing. I mean, I guess every movie has a writer at the heart of the thing, but I felt like people love this writer.
Interesting.
And I did not love this writer. He got on my nerves.
Again, I think that's something you see a lot in the Woody Allen movies, is like, famously he would cast as his wife or his girlfriend or romantic partner like somebody way out of his league, like a really beautiful actress, and she would be like inexplicably smitten with him and attracted to him, even though he's like a skinny, short, neurotic guy, writer. And I think you get a little bit of that here too. Like, the people are kind of overreactive to this guy. And I think the fourth end of this kind of love quadrangle, so that's the Denholm Elliott character, he gets the short end of it. I felt like he didn't have enough to do. If they were going to really have him be like a key component of it, I feel like he needed a little bit more.
Yeah, after Lane shot him down, I feel like he probably could have just left. But it's almost comical that he's hanging around, and there's even a moment towards the end when Elaine Stritch comes around a corner and she's like, "Howard, you're still here?"
That's how you felt about the character?
A little bit of lampshading there, yeah.
One interesting thing about this movie, apparently he wrote it and he shot it, and then he was like, "Nah, I want to make it again." And so he rewrote it, and then he went and reshot it. He just shot it twice. I mean, honestly, you can kind of see why you could do that. Like, you could probably shoot this movie in like 3 days, because it's in one set, it's 6 actors, and there's no stunts. It's just medium shots of people talking. So, I mean, it is the kind of movie you could pretty easily go and make.
Now I'm imagining it with stunts. Like Western saloon fights, people jumping out the windows.
You could have like glasses being thrown at each other and tackling and stuff. I don't know. I feel like that would not be entirely out of line with some of the content here. But yeah, very understated for Woody Allen. Again, not the movie I would have brought as the ideal means of talking about some of the Woodyisms. One that to keep your ear out for. If anybody ever gets mentioned as a scientist or a doctor, the specific type of scientist or doctor, or something about them being a scientist or doctor, is going to be content in the screenplay. Like, in one of his movies, a character is introduced as a heart doctor. And I'm like, oh my God, I just get it over with. The monologue where he talks about being a heart doctor and not understanding the human heart or something like that. And sure enough, halfway through the movie, you get one of those monologues. But we kind of get that with the physicist here. And then there's a line about, like, I think Stephanie's husband is a doctor. And she's like, "I'm afraid he'll give me an x-ray and see what I'm feeling inside," or something like that. That's another common Woody Allen writing trick. But yeah, I guess maybe also not the best way to introduce you to Woody Allen, because it sounds like you didn't like the movie very much, Brian.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan. I feel like I was probably overly harsh to the movie last week. I should have boosted that one up a little bit, because I didn't like this one as much as that one.
Another thing I want to call out as a positive, though, is I feel like the acting is pretty good for the writing, especially because it's all these long takes. I especially thought the women, I thought Diane Wiest and Elaine Stritch and Mia Farrow all gave good performances. And I don't know, like, just seeing them kind of continuously, you get kind of engaged with them. At least that's what I find.
I did kind of identify with the Mia Farrow character. Like, she's trying to find her feet and, like, forge an economically viable path forward to sustain herself. And we never quite find the answer to that, I don't think. And it seems intentional. Like, there's discussion, oh, she's going to move to New York. Well, what is she going to do in New York? Well, she's done photography. So, all right, she's done photography. Is that a business? Arguable. You need like a lot of clientele and infrastructure before a hobby becomes a business.
Yeah, and they talk a little bit about that. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of relatable. Like, a lot of Woody Allen's movies deal with this sort of like early midlife crisis. We're like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, what is my calling here on this planet? And Lane is facing that.
Yeah. So that, I thought, landed for me.
According to Letterboxd logs, this is one of Woody Allen's least enduring movies. Out of his 52 films, this is his third least popular. So, for whatever reason, people haven't been called to this one.
And it says budget was $10 million, box office take was $500,000.
Interesting. I wonder how many of his movies are profitable. Because he tended to make them on a pretty small budget. Yeah, I mean, it's also, just to kind of put it bluntly, it's kind of boring. There's just, it's characters talking, and they're not especially interesting people. And they're dealing with like kind of basic unrequited love and longing. And some of it is kind of compelling and some of it isn't. So at least that's my opinion. But I guess we've kind of set our pieces on this, Brian. Is it good? Are you ready to rate?
Let's take an X-ray and see what's inside.
Is it good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So, Brian, is September good?
Well, I spent more of this movie than the typical movie groaning. Like, it's not super long. It felt kind of long. And part of that is just the repetition. I didn't like Peter. I didn't understand his lust for Diane Wiest, but also when she was not receptive to it, he should have pulled back. And he didn't. He was just very aggressive, very insistent. And yeah, I don't know. I was off-put. I was put off by much of this film. I like the cinematography, the lighting, the sound design that kind of puts you in this space. But then I started feeling claustrophobic. It's like, I want to breathe a little bit. I want to step out on the porch. I want to see the outside of this house. I stopped believing that there was an outside to this house. Like, it started feeling like it was a soundstage. I don't know for sure that it was, but it's like, you've established yourself in your career. Get an outside. Like, show me the facade of a house. And so I started feeling like trapped, and as you said, bored. And I can't give this a 1 because I've kind of established that as my rating for movies that have something fundamentally wrong with them at the level of the form. And this is at least constructed well. Generally, I like the cast, I suppose. But it didn't work for me. I didn't love this film. I'm going to edge it into a 2. I will say I'm open to watching more Woody Allen movies. I liked the one that I have seen previous to this, which was the Midnight in Paris. There's some time travel in that one. So a bit of genre flavor, perhaps. And comedy also, which was lacking here. So what are you thinking, Dan?
I think the next Woody Allen movie you see, Brian, you should look up Sleeper, I think it's called, which is an early movie. It's very jokey, and it takes place in like a sci-fi future. And Woody Allen plays either a robot or a pretend robot or something like that. I think you'd get a kick out of that one.
Okay. I'm interested.
And what I will say is the first time I watched this, it was at the point where I was giving ratings to everything. Is it good ratings to every movie I watched? And I gave it a 5, a good, but I noted it as a minor Allen film. I'm going to bump that down to a 4. I'm going to say this is good-ish because I still think it plays a little better if you kind of view it as Woody Allen trying something. He's trying to make like the equivalent of a stage play where everything kind of happens off screen and we're just kind of dealing with the tension of all that stuff kind of feeding in together and the way that the characters clash. And other than portions of the second act where it really kind of comes to a head, I feel like it moves at too slow of a trickle and just not enough sparks to really be an interesting example of that format. Like I said, it is just kind of boring, but I think some of the writing is good. I would give it more credit than you gave it for kind of like some of the character writing with some subtlety to it. Like you kind of got to read between the lines on some of the interactions. And I think the performances are strong, particularly for the women. I think all of them are good. And I think there's a couple of excellent scenes and then a bunch of medium scenes. And I like how minimal and unadorned it is, and how he kind of like strips out anything non-diegetic, anything outside of the house, anything outside of that like kind of trapped reality that they have. I think it's kind of it's more of an experiment than anything. So I would echo that this isn't the way to get into Woody Allen. It's kind of like very, very deep cut Woody Allen, but it fit into month with the title. So, it is what it is.
A very monthy movie. High rating for how monthy this movie is.
So I'm going to give it a goodish, a 4 out of 8, because of all the things that I just said. I think I still have an appreciation for it, even if I'm just a little more bored by it than I was the first time I watched.
I did really like, there's 2 moments where the camera moves to reveal something that were done quite well. When Lane finds Stephanie and Peter making out in the closet. And it's like they're making out, and then they kind of lean against the door, and the door tilts open, and the camera pans with them, and then Lane is out there. That was funny and effective. And they kind of did the same thing again when later there's the big emotional blow-up, the reveal that actually it was the mom who killed the lover and not Lane. And the camera pans, and the people who are trying to buy the house are standing there.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
And it's like, that was funny too. I liked that. I wish there was more of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the shot where the door opens and you see Lane catching Peter and Stephanie kissing, I think that's the best shot of the movie. And yeah, just appreciation for the long takes and the actors kind of pulling through on the long takes. I think that it adds to the immersion. So that is week 2 of month, Brian. And I have mentioned for years now that at some point I want to kind of address my myriad Woody Allen thoughts, and I feel like I didn't even get through all of them here. Like I could just kind of go through each of his movies and like what it kind of says about him and what I like and don't like about him. But we finally did broach the subject with September in month. And where are we headed next with month, Brian?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to shatter our perfect streak of titles where it's just the month and nothing else. I've thought of a couple possibilities for this next pick, but what I ultimately landed on was March of the Penguins. Dan, we're going to watch March the Penguins.
All right.
Have you seen this one?
I might have around the time when it came out. It's a documentary, right?
That's right. And I'm in the same boat that I probably saw it back in 2005 when it came out, but it's been a long, long time. I'm ready to revisit.
So I would get this and Happy Feet mixed up because they're both Penguin movies from the same time. But one of them is a George Miller animated family comedy and one is a family documentary. So they're very different, but
I wish we could watch Happy Feet. I have things to talk about Happy Feet, but unfortunately it is excluded from our criteria.
Well, maybe I'll still watch Happy Feet. I've been on a George Miller kick anyways, so I don't know. But yeah, March of the Penguins.
I think that's a good idea. I might watch Happy Feet as well.
Didn't he make a Happy Feet 2 as well?
Yeah, there was Happy Feet 2. There was also somewhere in the mix that mockumentary animated penguin movie that was called Surf's Up.
Oh, yeah. That's a mockumentary. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
It's shot like an episode of The Office, but it's a cartoon movie.
Huh. Well, there you go. Alrighty. I guess we'll talk about March the Penguins. It's not just not a month, but it's like a different March. It's like not the month name.
That's right. Well, the other one that I was thinking of was March of the Wooden Soldiers, which would have been Christmas movie.
Okay.
But I found out that, like, that's not the official title of the film. That was like a re-release 20 years later, Baudelarized cut of what was officially titled Babes in Toyland. And so maybe in Christmas, we'll, like, when it's really December, we'll watch the various releases of Babes in Toyland.
Okay, but it doesn't qualify for month. We're doing March of the
Right, I
Penguins.
thought it rolled it out, and so March of the Penguins is
Alrighty.
the ticket.
Well, thanks, Brian. This was fun. And we will pick up month next week.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye, everybody.
Tune in again, listeners. Thanks.